Good evening and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Henriette Abrahams. Tonight we're going to be speaking about food security, or rather the lack thereof, in South Africa and on a local level. Now, one of the interesting pieces of information that came up while researching this topic is that South Africa is actually food secure at the national level. What that means is that our country imports and produces enough food to feed every single citizen. It's on the local level where things fall apart due to poverty, unemployment, transport, and a range of other issues. Tonight we're going to be speaking to a range of experts on the topic of food security, the effect on communities, and the effect on women as feeders within the homes and within communities. In the following clip by Wits University, we hear how food security increases by 55% when women become economically active. Let's have a look.
My name is Henriette Abrahams. I'm an associate professor in the geography department at Wits. We're working a lot on the issue of gender and education and the ways in which gender and education intersect with food sovereignty. So they found that there was a 55% improvement of food security as the position of women improved in those societies, which is an extraordinary statistics. It means that we need to be thinking about the issue of food far more holistically than we have been before. And we need to be thinking about that very fundamental, important role that women play in producing and ensuring that their families are fed when we think about food. Well, I think the biggest challenge that we have is that women tend to hold a somewhat disempowered position in society, which makes the access to food security initiatives quite variable. For example, if we think about what are the things that you need to be food secure, one of them is land. And women tend, because of the ways in which culture and different kinds of values work, women tend not to have access to land as much as men do. And the other issues would be mobility. Women tend, because they have a lot of childcare, because there's a division of labour where women are expected to look after children, it's a lot more difficult for them to be mobile. So if they do grow gardens and they do happen to have a surplus in those gardens, it's very difficult for them to actually go into marketplaces where they can sell that surplus and then feed that surplus back into the gardens to grow them.
The Vitsiakana initiative is one that is addressing food security through high-level research, teaching and training, advocacy, and implementing a Siakana garden in which we are currently standing. Not everybody has got a decent bit of land, but there are also other methodologies and techniques and technologies for growing food in your garden. And some of our research shows that you can generate up between 200 and 400 rand a month value of vegetables and herbs that you can utilize in your own kitchens, and I think this is something that we are encouraging.
That's what we want to teach our communities, to be involved, not to just plant, but to actually plant something that are going to take it out there, that is going to be desirable out there, that plant crops that are going to be market themselves.
These kinds of projects are absolutely essential. It's essential because what happens in a project like this is that not only do you have women and men engaged in growing food, which is very practical and fundamental way, you also get changes of identity. When you think about women taking on work which is not usually associated with women, you start to think about women in different ways. When women start to bring food into the household and are able to feed their own children, their sense of empowerment improves.
The importance of addressing this problem is reminding people what they were taught many years ago, that their grandmothers, and that's such a common statement when young people come to visit Siakana, they say, wow, this is what our grandmothers taught us to do.
Welcome back. You're still with the Womxn Show. I'm Lynette Maart. Tonight we are speaking about food security, and joining us now is Henriette Abrahams, who is a community activist working on the front lines in the Bonteheuwel area as well as the rest of Cape Town. Henriette is going to speak to us about what food insecurity has looked like on the front lines for families, communities, and especially for women and children. Henriette, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having us, Danina.
So Henriette, you work on the front line in the communities with the community, with the women, with the people, and also have been involved in quite a number of feeding schemes. Can you tell us, just to start us off, what does food insecurity look like at the front line? And I mean both before the coronavirus and the lockdown, and as well as after.
Okay, food security, what I like to call it is food poverty, because we are food secure, but when it comes to working class and particularly women, we have food poverty because of unemployment, because of lowly paid wages, because of casualization of work. Our people don't have enough money to go around to see to their basic needs. And that includes food. If we look at the food that our people are using, it is something like meat. Red meat is not priority because it's too costly. Things like fruit, for instance, and vegetables such as mushrooms and corn and those things are not in our people's reach. So those who have a little to buy will buy the bare necessities. Those who are on your SAFCEI grants, for instance, and your child grants, they would use their money and last for a week and a half, 2 weeks at most, if there's a lot of SAFCEI grants in that particular household. So the situation and the story are very bleak. People are living from hand to mouth. People are going to loan sharks. You have people knocking on doors for food to assist to complete the pot or for a complete pot. You have children on our streets that are begging. Now, of course, COVID-19 has exacerbated this situation for our people, in particular our women. For instance, a number of women have lost their jobs. Over 3 million, 2 million were women. And then we found, when we went into lockdown level 4, level 3, you also had a rise in gender-based violence, and that was because of all the stresses of poverty. I'll stop it there for now.
Thank you, Henriette, for that look, which is very bleak and very understandable. And as you said, an issue that's been coming on long before COVID. COVID just exacerbated this. I wanted to ask, so women, you spoke about the effect on women, the compound effect on women, and who are generally the feeders in the household. And there's a saying, they talk about breadwinners, they call them the ones who bring home the bacon, but I often say that women are the ones who cook the bacon, whether they're bringing it home or not. So when you talk about the effect of food security on women, you mentioned that they're going out into the streets, they're obviously attending feeding schemes, they are knocking on doors. What is the effect of this on women, both physically but mentally as well?
Mentally, it has got a huge effect. You must also understand that our people we're talking about our people's dignity and pride. So you would not have, for instance, have seen people, some people in the streets because they had too much pride, for instance, and dignity. Not too much, but they consider their dignity and pride to stand in a line or to even ask for help. Now, even amongst us as women, we don't ask even our friends or our family. It's a difficult thing to get to that point where you actually ask for assistance or help. So that emotional effect has been on the increase, for instance, because more and more women are there. The other thing is people think that men are the breadwinners, but in today's world, more and more women are the breadwinners, and more and more men are either on casualized work or they are unemployed. So our women, for instance, was hit hard. That our women, for instance, that's working within the hospitality industry, our women that are working in the call centers, our women that are general domestic workers, our women all over in the retail marketing and those areas have been hit hard. So they have lost income. And many of our women are single parents as well. So obviously, people had to spiral, what about this? And also they had bills to pay. So what are the choices they have to make? So one can only think of that anguish, right? And then one can also think of the stresses that's going on because there's not enough butter to last us for 2 days. We need to make a way for potatoes or onions or even a bread's money for tonight. So all the stresses that's going on about that. We have a kitchen assembly in our Bonteheuwel Development Forum where we share and where we hold our women that's involved in our feeding schemes, in our street and block committees, where we assist them to manage, to manage and to hold and to look at trauma, any trauma that they're going through and so forth. It's important for us as women to bound together and to support and hold one another in this traumatic space. We're not only dealing with health issues now, but we're also dealing with psychosocial issues, and therefore we need to support our women in any way we can.
Henriette, thank you so much. Now, you mentioned some of the block committees, the feeding schemes. We know that these have been going in various communities across Cape Town, across the country, really. Can you just expand on what are the ways that communities have been trying to address the issue, and what is in place by government, and where are the challenges between these two spaces?
Okay, so what we have been doing and many other communities is that we have jumped out, and as a forum, we have jumped out before lockdown even. So we started with food hampers. Then we realized after five weeks, then 1,550 food hampers, that this is not sufficient, and more people are in need. So we went to feeding schemes. We opened 2 feeding schemes per block, which added up to 34 feeding schemes in our area in Bonteheuwel and Lynette Maart. So after that, so we thought, okay, so we have the feeding schemes money, we're starting to get donor fatigue and so forth. We need to make this sustainable if we need to continue, because this is the situation not only under COVID, but it will be the situation moving out of COVID also probably in the next 6 months. So we've started food gardens and community and household gardens in each block. So you either had, we went to schools and we went to individuals and asked them if we could use their yards or their properties to grow food in, and that food in the food gardens, particularly in the community food gardens, are going to go towards school feeding scheme and community feeding schemes in that block. So we, for instance, collectively have about 2.5 hectares of land of various schools and private gardens that we have to work. Now, some of these gardens are proving to be challenging because we needed to hire a bulldozer, we needed to hire tractors to work the land and so forth because of the slabs and the stuff that was buried there before. So, and then, of course, you have issues of security. You must understand that the school grounds that we are having, a lot of our people are dumping on the school grounds. But dumping is a huge issue, so that is an issue of health. That's an issue of the environment, and we needed to curb that, but also needed to get food into our soil. So we slowly but surely getting there. We now started the nursery. We help and support where some people know more or they have better green fingers. They go from the one block to the other block and assist one another, because as a community we are into it. We're growing food for the people, by people. Our next point in getting us food secure also is to move into bakeries and see how do we produce our own bread at a lower cost, but it's a more wholesome bread that we sell to our people. So we will create jobs for our women in particular in our various groups, in our various blocks, when it comes to baking breads and selling the bread at a low cost, but also then using that rand or two that we're making a profit, not even a 2 rand, we plow back into what it is that we need in our communities. And how, for instance, if we need CMTs, we have a lot of seamstresses, we have a lot of people in the clothing and textile workers. How do we open CMTs? How do we open bakeries? How do we open cottage industries within our working class areas that's going to create work, but also going to look at food security for our poor people in our areas?
Thank you, Henriette. Can you tell us also, just from the role of government, but with you being in the community, working at the front lines with beneficiaries, we have at this point social grants, and we know that with COVID there have been extra grants that have been rolled out and food parcels distributed by government as well. And I say as well because I know communities also mobilizing and distributing those food parcels themselves and many other organizations. But is it enough? If we were looking at this as a sort of whole or collaborative effort, what are the challenges, and where do we need government to step in more, and with what, in order to make a greater contribution to food security?
Okay, for me, government has been, we all know that government has been very slow on the uptake during this pandemic. They have delivered food parcels to certain people, but in fact, I think it was less food parcels than what we as a community-based organization distributed. So government in itself, like what the pandemic clearly showed, is that government, as well as these big NGOs, does not really have proper footholds within our communities. So they couldn't get their act together. They didn't know where our people were, who the needy were, and all of those things. So they need to get their act together in terms of getting people involved that's on the ground, that we know, because we know who our people are in need, who our people in need are, what it is, what our own needs within our various communities are. Also, in terms of food security and government, they are not. The T and Department of Agriculture for Western Cape is only talking now about food security and food security plans and the rollouts for the city. And the household and the community food garden support that is offered by the Department of Agriculture, for instance, is not sufficient for our needs as communities, because they call it a suitcase, and we need fencing, we need water, we need wells to be dug up, we need expertise, we need soil analysis and all of those things. And Department of Agriculture had to be on the forefront. When we said food security is the problem, they had to be on the forefront leading this under their department, but they're not. We going there. In fact, we have contacted them, and they said, but we don't have a budget, and that is locally and nationally, and that is not on. Department DTI, for instance, they had to be more. They're looking at SMEs, and they looked at big business, but they did not look at community-based. They did not look at social enterprises as an answer for food security and job opportunities within our communities. They did not look what it is that we can do, public works, did not how they can help with creating jobs and giving land for food security. So there's a lack of imagination and getting all the cogs in the wheel to work together. So that has been very disappointing. They've been very tardy. People are sitting in Zoom meetings and from the one meeting to the other meeting, while we are running around, risking our health, giving our last cents, having to break our backs to fundraise, to get our people food, to get our food into the ground, and to get our people jobs.
Thank you very much, Henriette. That's very interesting, and also You're right. We do need the Department of Agriculture involved. It's sort of an obvious thing. And so it's something I think for all of us to think about and to also consider and push for within our advocacy. I just want to pivot quickly to food security or food insecurity and gender-based violence. And, you know, one can't look at it in isolation. I wanted to ask you about some of the ways that food and food poverty, as you called it, becomes a catalyst for gender-based violence.
Yes, for me, it is a reality, because we see more and more women running from the one block to the other, running from the one street to the other. You see more and more women going. I mean, if I look, I can tell in my neighborhood and even in my area who is on their way to where for what, literally. It's not that I'm a witch or a musician that has got this eye that can see who's talking, but I know people's situations, for instance, and I know, okay, this woman is on her way here. This woman is not in a good state. She is not in a good physical or emotional state because of not having food. And there's a lot of abuse, be it emotional abuse, be it physical abuse, or just economic abuse. There's no money, the worst thing, and so other people will disagree with me, the worst thing that government could have done is to ban the cigarettes and to ban the alcohol. You know what our men were doing in our working class areas? They were keeping their 50 rands for their beers, they were keeping their 100 rands for their cigarettes, and rather buy their cigarettes and chase their women and their children to the feeding queues. So men who were working or getting salaries kept their money at the expense of their families and their children to smoke and to drink. So that was a difficult and a tough time for our women to go through, because they knew there was money coming into the house, for instance, but that money was not allowed to buy food, because that money had to go for an expensive bottle of wine or cigarettes or whatever it is. So that also caused a lot of abuse and a lot of physical violence, gender-based violence, towards our children and towards our women as it is.
Thank you, Henriette. I mean, that's all we really have time for, but I just wanted to end off with some last thoughts from you around food security, and also some words to communities, to activists, and possibly even a word to government.
I want to ask our communities to not wait on government, that we can do it for ourselves. There are many times that we don't have money, but we put a pot together, and those who can give, we give a bottle of fish oil here, we give rice there, we give a pocket of potatoes there, somebody fills up the gas, we can do it for ourselves. We don't have to sit and wait and wait and wait. And I want to tell you that we can sit, keep your pups, keep your green pepper pups, keep your butternut, your squash pups, dry it out, put it in the ground. Ask your children, our youth is very good at Googling. Ask them to assist you how to grow. Grow one thing at a time if you must. Get something, let us do something for ourselves. If we're going to wait on government, we're going to starve. Government is not ready, and every time they come into us, they say they don't have sufficient money. Or Treasury, the one government will tell you that they will assist you, but then they have to go to Treasury. When they get to Treasury has no money for us. So at the end of the day, we need to organize ourselves, and we need to start doing things for ourselves. Next year, come 2021, we take government on and we take them to task. You want us to vote for you, but you have not looked after us in a time when we needed you, be it under the pandemic or even before the pandemic. We cannot sit with civil servants that is not serving the poor. We, the poor, the majority of poor of the electorate have put you there, and yet you go there and you sell us out for a few pieces of ruble. The very money that is supposed to have been spent on the poor's needs are being stolen by civil servants, by government and their networks. So next year we have a good and a great task. We need to organize ourselves. We need to see to our own food security. And next year we take our power back from these people that is selling us out and robbing us and putting us in our graves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henriette, and thank you for joining us and for your thoughts.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
That was Henriette Abrahams, who is a community activist in Bonteheuwel dealing with food security and a host of other issues. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching The Womxn Show, and tonight we're discussing food security. Social justice media organization Workers' World recently interviewed Francesca de Gasparis, who is the executive director of SAFCEI, which is the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Francesca spoke about food security from a gendered perspective. Let's hear what she had to say.
Good afternoon. My name is Francesca de Gasparis. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, also known by everyone as SAFCEI. You know, South Africa's inequality and poverty crisis is a long-running issue for South Africa. It started right back under colonial times when people were given unequal rights, and it was perpetuated even more seriously under apartheid, and in recent years it has continued to grow. So it's a long-standing issue. We know that women earn approximately 30% less than men, and while South Africa looks like it has a healthy GDP to the rest of the world, in fact inequality in South Africa is absolutely rife. About 60% of all households rely more on the social grant than they do on income that they can make through work. So inequality is a problem that is fundamental and fractures our society very deeply. In 2017, about almost 7 million South Africans were known to be food insecure. So that's a really high percentage of our population. And this number has not decreased over time. Many people are going to bed hungry, and especially now with the crisis that we're facing. COVID-19 has been had a devastating impact on many communities in South Africa. Many people are going to bed hungry. They've lost their incomes, and even if it was a small income that was coming in, it made a huge difference to families. So we're now seeing millions upon millions of people without enough food and very hungry situations right across the country. Under the COVID-19 crisis, what we're seeing is that the informal sector has been hit extremely hard. Even soup kitchens and communities who normally would be getting food from someone within their local environment, that's no longer happening. Small-scale farmers are being negatively impacted. So the very fabric of how we obtain food, how we can purchase it, how we can cook it, people are going to bed hungry every night. And so the impact has been absolutely massive. The COVID-19, although it's going to be a terrible threat for our country, at the moment what we're seeing is people not having food to put in their mouths. So it's literally taken the food out of their mouths. You know, the South African government has been commended around the world. In fact, I read somewhere a statistic that it was second in terms of believable facts and taking action. And that's in terms of sort of the medicine and the science that we know around COVID-19. However, you know, our government systematically hasn't addressed the issue of inequality in our country, which means that we have structural issues that keep people that are already in an incredibly vulnerable place. And that means that the gains that we could have seen over the last decades mean that they have no safety net now. So while the government is taking steps, and I know that the steps that it's taking will make a difference, it's a little bit slow. I'm loath to criticize the government when we know that even governments that have all the resources in the world, they haven't responded effectively to this virus. But the reality is we've had systematic undermining of the opportunities of work and the opportunities for people to create livelihoods for themselves and to live in under safer conditions. So the government is responsible for not doing more before, and it needs to do more now. Well, first of all, I think the government needs to think far beyond the major supermarkets and think about the informal sector. There is a massive industry there. It's a source of livelihood. It's also a source of food. The small-scale farmers in particular should be freed up to be part of the system. I think the government needs to think very strategically about how it creates opportunities for communities to get the food they need, to earn livelihoods. So there's certain things that definitely need to change. Right now, it's almost impossible for people to actually, even if they get the small grant, which is, I'm sure, going to be difficult. We've seen issues long before this with the social grants. So how is this going to work? This is the biggest test our government has ever faced. And they are going to have to really show them their ability to deliver, because otherwise we're going to have starving people. It's going to be even bigger social unrest than what we've seen already. I mean, it's an absolute tragedy that people are now starving. It's devastating for our country, and it would take us a very long time to recover from it. So the government needs to, and I'm sure that many of them are working very, very hard to support communities, but we also need those who are looting to get their fingers out of the pockets of monies that's coming towards them, because this is no longer the time for them to be enriching themselves. They really need to be more community-minded. And as a faith-based organization, for us, it's very easy to say it's morally wrong. We must do everything we can. We must put all our resources towards supporting people who really have been put in a situation where they will be struggling to help themselves and their families.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, our government and its military response or its police response has a very bad track record. And we've already seen huge injustices happen. People have been very badly injured. Someone has died. Maybe more people have died, actually. There's a lot of unrest going on, and the government's response has not been proportional. The military is not a peacekeeping force. It's being deployed to do so, but they need to understand exactly what that means and have very, very clear instructions on how they behave and how they work in community. They need to be there for the communities, not against them. And you see pictures of armored vehicles coming outside where people are living, and you think this is harking back to apartheid era. So I'm feeling very concerned about the deployment of military, and I'd like to see a very clear, the kind of clear message we've had under lockdown about what we're allowed to do for the military, for the police. I'd like them to be held to account for their actions as seriously as we are being held to account by them. So they really need to not step out of line, and they need to really understand what they're dealing with here. These are people who are desperate. This isn't some kind of political unrest. That's not what this is. This is people who are just trying to feed their families, and it should be dealt with appropriately and accordingly. As an environmental organization, we know that if people have access to healthy, nutritious, fresh food, their immune systems are stronger and they're better able to deal with flu viruses, including the COVID-19 virus. And so giving people non-perishable foods is a start, but we really need to be connecting farms to forks. Everyone has the right for nutritious food. Everyone has the right to have what they need to sustain themselves. And it's incredibly important for young children who aren't getting meals in schools now. We need to put extra emphasis on making sure those children are getting the food they need so their brains can develop, so they can keep learning and keep becoming our future. So right now we're at risk on so many different levels beyond the virus, and the government needs to take those seriously. I can see it making a start, but we need to see more. We need to see bigger efforts being made, and we need to see them really thinking outside the box and working with civil society like SAFCEI. We're part of the COVID-19 coalition of civil society NGOs, and we are working to challenge the government where it's brought in far too tight restrictions, which is stopping the informal sector. We're working to try and mobilize amongst the food sector to connect farmers with communities, with soup kitchens. And we really want to call on everyone, if you've got a little bit of spare money, please, or a bit of spare time, and you're allowed to be a part of helping communities, please make an effort, get involved. There are things you can do. Go on to Google and have a look and get engaged, because everyone is needed to fight this situation that we're in right now.
That was Francesca de Gasparis from SAFCEI. And now we're going to hear from Lynette Maart, who is the National Director at Black Sash, speaking on the scale of poverty and food insecurity in South Africa, the use of social grants to address this, as well as the possibility of a universal basic income and what that might look like. Let's have a look.
My name is Lynette Maart. I'm the National Director of the Black Sash. The Black Sash is a very old organization, and this year it will celebrate, in fact in May 19, it will celebrate its 65th birthday. So yeah, it's been around the block. It's a human rights organization. It's fought for many years under the apartheid years for human rights. These days the human rights are in place through the Constitution, but there are many, many different aspects, particularly the socio-economic rights, that are still needing adjustments or placements. And we also focus specifically on, within the socio-economic cluster, on social security rights. And social security rights are split into two. There is the social assistance for people who have no form of income security, and then there is social insurance. So issues like the UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, the Road Accident Fund, pensions, retirement, provident funds, etc. are all elements of social insurance. And sometimes we have to touch on those because people might have had a job but lost the job and therefore needs to move on to other forms of support. And so the Black Sash has been focusing particularly on the last couple of years on the social grant system. And we know that we experience quite a lot of problems with the outsourcing of grants. And then there's a particular issue around income support for 18 to 59 years with no or little income. The state doesn't make provision for that category. So those were just some of the things that kept us busy. We also work with the advice office sector. There are about 311 advice officers around the country and other CBOs. So the way in which we work is to work with people to monitor on the ground, then take the information, utilize that information to write reports or to see what the trends are, and then push those issues up for advocacy. And other kind of interventions that we need to make at a national level, but also at an international level. So there's three challenges for South Africa. It is poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Those are the three big challenges that South Africa has not been able to address. So let me just give you a little bit of a landscape. There are 58 million people in South Africa, okay? There are about 12.6 million children. There is about 3.6 million, or just over that, of people on the old age pension. And then there's just over 1 million people who are on a disability grant. But that cluster of people accounts for 18 million of South Africa's population. And that's people who have been means tested, and there's various ways in which the means test is happening, but they are unable to support themselves or their families. So there's 18 million people in the system, and it's paid through about 12 million plus bank accounts because children are minors, and so the money of the child support grants and the foster care grants go through their parents or caregivers or guardians for that matter. Now, we know from Stats SA, just prior to COVID, there were about 10.4 million people who were unemployed. The narrow definition, we prefer the broad definition, but it's about 38% of the South African labor force that does not have a job. And then there's an estimate of about 5.5 million people who are in the informal economy, whether they're traders, domestic workers, farm workers, but many of them are precariously employed. Short-term contracts through labor brokers, etc. And the Casual Workers Advice Office would tell you that there's a lot of those forms of employment. And then, and PLAS estimates that there's about 5.5 million of people in that category. From the formal economy side, the COVID-19 crisis, people are estimating that there will be 1.6 million people that would have lost their jobs as a result of this pandemic. Now, let's just think through the situation of the economy. Over time, the economy has not produced a lot of jobs. In fact, the downgrading of South Africa's status to junk status is a result of that economic growth that did not happen as projected. The Reserve Bank more recently said that for this year, the South African economy will actually grow, have a negative growth of 6.1% of GDP. So we are losing jobs. And it's not going to be an issue that's going to be fixed very, very easily. In fact, we have what we call structural unemployment. And the chances of these people getting jobs are very, very limited because of the economic growth, and also because as the trend goes forward, the fourth industrial revolution, that is automation, has started to kick in. Now, the state's response has been in several ways. They've given 50 billion rand to cover social relief, okay? And the introductions are as follows. They've given top-ups to some of the existing grants, so 250 rand extra on, say, for example, the old age grant, the disability grant, and other smaller grants. On the child support grant, they've given 500 rand, for May, and then it goes back to 450 rand in June. Okay, so that one, the minister has acknowledged that there is a problem. The Children's Institute, supported by organizations like the Black Sash and others, have written to the president around that particular issue. And in her press briefing, she said that that issue of the child support grant increase will be addressed. Now, the second one is they've introduced the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress grant. And that grant is the grant where I'm saying it's 350 rand. Now, at the moment, we are waiting for the application processes to open. And the application processes are slow. They had a WhatsApp and they had an email. The WhatsApp has collapsed because just too many people applying there and they needed to tweak the system. The emails, people are saying we don't get responses from the emails. What's also concerning is that there are people without ICT. And so where will those people register that do not have any form of, whether it is a laptop or a smartphone, access to data or interconnectivity? Where will those people register? Okay, and that's a huge problem. And so we're watching that particular space to see how that pans out. There's also, we're waiting for the regulations. The criteria is unclear. And so the minister needs to make more work of that. And once that is clear, it must be communicated. And it must also, we must know what those mechanisms are that people need to go to apply, and what documents, what criteria, etc. But I think one of the challenges is that the SASSA offices, Home Affairs offices, must be opened with full complement, because throughout this crisis the SASSA offices were closed, or that people were working remotely. And so challenges around food parcels, challenges around the application forms needs to be dealt with in a very good manner, so that people feel that their human dignity is respected. So those are the two processes that are beginning to merge. We saw the top-ups happening in May. And also government has, SASSA has moved the dates of payments so that it's staggered, and so that we don't have the crisis that we had in April, where everybody goes to the normal payment channels and it's overcrowded. So one also has to think through those processes. So in the absence of any form of relief, many people are seeking food parcels. Now, SASSA and DST initially had an outline of about 1 million food parcels. But they realized that for food parcels, you need to have a very good infrastructure to disseminate the food parcels. And in this dissemination, you might also discover all forms of corruption. And we've seen also those on our television screens where councillors, etc., have dipped into those food parcels for their own means. So you need a highly sophisticated system, and you need to have clear criteria for who receive and who don't receive. And in some instances, there's been also political issues around who gets food parcels and who don't get food parcels. So you need to have a system that is transparent, clear, open, and that's administered because there is undue hardship in that particular household. The COVID-19 social relief of distress grant, once that kicks in and it begins to work, we think that the food parcel production will reduce a little bit. SASSA did, the minister in her media briefing indicated that they will only cover 250,000 food parcels, and those are related to the food supplies that they have done before, like, for example, the children who were getting food at schools, and then there are also other families that are in need that must be put on grants and so on. So that's the framework. There's tight frameworks around that. But because there is no other mechanism, people are really, in some of the interviews we've heard, people were saying that we are going to die of starvation rather than this virus. And I think that must be taken very seriously by government. Look, we're saying that the COVID grant is a step in the right direction, but it's a small step. No? It's a foot into the door. And we are very keen that government make that a permanent grant, number one. Number two, that the amount be increased. Number three, that there's minimal administrative requirements for people to access the grant. That thirdly, government is saying upon registration, from then onwards you will get the grants. But we've seen the delay in terms of paying the grants, getting the infrastructure in place, the regulations, the systems, etc. When government are paying that grant should be backdated, in fact, to May, when it was due to be paid. And particularly those in the rural areas with no access. You can't punish people for a system that is not there. The minister said by the 15th or the 16th of May, people will start receiving their grants. But there's lots of technological systems issues, there's regulations, etc. that must all be put in place. So we do want to urge government to do back pay.
That was Lynette Maart speaking about poverty, food insecurity, and social grants. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back after this.
Hoe koop mevrouw met die COVID-19 pandemic gedurende die lockdown?
Ik had niks gekoopt. Pas meeste van die tijd was ik brouw.
Het nog soos 'n boeing op ons geval. Ek koop glad die rami nou nie, because it's te lang.
En dan die government het ons al 350 increase gegee vir die unemployed en vir die kinders en vir die ou mense almal increase gegee. Dan mevrou, dat sal help om die lewe 'n bietjie makliker te maak.
Het zal precies, maar ik denk niet dat hulle moet het maken. Temporary, maar voor altijd met hulle het maken.
Okay, dankie mevrou, lekker dag.
That's all we have for this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rasool. Good night.